In 1238, Mongol executioners lowered a living woman into a vat filled with oak bark extract and lime, a mixture designed not to kill instantly, but to change the very nature of human skin. For 23 straight days they kept her conscious while her body underwent a transformation so controlled, so deliberate, that historians still argue over how it was even possible. But that wasn't the part that stunned ancient chroniclers. The real shock was who she was, Genghis Khan's own granddaughter, a decorated battlefield commander praised across the steppe. And according to 3 independent historical sources, she continued to sing war songs throughout the entire procedure, refusing silence even as her body was being chemically preserved. Before we go deeper, by the end of this video you'll uncover 3 truths that scholars tried to conceal for over 7 centuries. First, the exact chemical sequence that allowed living human tissue to undergo preservation while the victim's mind remained fully aware. Second, the identity of the legendary female general who endured this fate, and why this sentence was ordered by members of her own bloodline. And third, the reason Mongol law considered this punishment merciful, despite its terrifying reputation. If you're ready for the parts of history that textbooks are too afraid to include, hit that subscribe button right now because everything you're about to hear comes directly from Persian royal chronicles, the secret history of the Mongols, and Soviet-era forensic archives that UNESCO withheld until 2003. So let's return to the year 1238. To understand why this happened, you need to know about the warrior women history tried to erase. The Mongol Empire didn't conquer 20% of Earth's landmass by luck. By 1240, Mongol armies stretched from Korea to Hungary, Siberia to Iraq. Over 100 million people lived beneath their rule. And here's the secret your history teacher skipped entirely. Around 20% of Mongol military officers were women. Not assistants. Not medics. Commanders. Daughters of Khans led charges on horseback. They directed sieges. They carried out battlefield judgments. Genghis Khan's daughters governed territories the size of modern France. This wasn't symbolic power. Mongol girls trained in mounted archery from the age of 4. As the Persian historian Rashid al-Din wrote, they fight without the hesitation of mercy. But there was a rule that made Mongol society uniquely unforgiving. Military defeat wasn't just failure, it was dishonor worse than death. Male commanders had the privilege of a swift, clean execution. A bowstring around the neck, a single pull, and it was done, quiet and dignified. Female commanders, especially those of noble blood, faced something else entirely. Their punishment had to echo beyond their death. It had to be a permanent reminder, a warning etched into memory. This punishment had a name in the Mongol tongue, lek, skin-changing. And what I'm about to tell you isn't myth. It comes directly from the Tarikh-i-Jahangusha written by Giovanni in 1260, just 22 years after the event. It appears in encrypted passages of the secret history of the Mongols, only translated in the 1900s. And Armenian monks who witnessed the aftermath described it in writing that still shakes scholars today. So let me walk you through the process, because even without graphic detail, the method itself is pure nightmare science. Human skin has 3 layers, the epidermis, the dermis, and the subcutaneous tissue. Traditional leather making targets the dermis, stabilizing its proteins. Modern tanners use chromium salts and industrial chemicals. The Mongols, astonishingly, discovered an early form of this preservation centuries earlier, and used it while the victim remained alive. According to Giovanni, stage 1 lasted 72 hours. The woman was immersed in a warm lime solution, not hot enough to induce shock, but maintained precisely to begin a slow chemical alteration of the outer layer of the skin. Chroniclers noted that the controlled temperature allowed her to remain conscious, fully sensing every moment of the procedure. Her voice, they wrote, echoed across the camp. Then came stage 2, the tannin immersion lasting 18 to 21 days. Oak bark extract mixed with animal fats slowly bonded to living tissue. Tannin molecules cross-link with collagen, the same reaction used in traditional leather making. But here it happened while blood still moved beneath the skin. Chroniclers didn't describe gore. They described a horrifying calmness, a slow transformation engineered with scientific precision centuries before chemistry existed as a discipline. The transformation worked steadily, layer by layer, moving from the surface inward. It began with the limbs, the arms, the legs, before slowly reaching the torso. Chroniclers wrote that the victim would witness her body shifting from the appearance of living flesh to the muted tones of cured hide over the course of several days. Stage 3 was what historians later called the preservation paradox, and it's here that the ritual becomes truly disturbing. The Mongols understood that no human could naturally survive such an extended transformation. Infection, organ failure, any of these would normally end the process long before completion. But according to encoded passages in the secret histories, the shamans overseeing this ritual intervened with methods almost surgical in their precision. They used herbal mixtures to steady the heartbeat. They gave water at exact intervals to prevent collapse. And as recorded in the Armenian chronicles, they even fed the victim a paste made from animal liver, today known to be rich in vitamin K, essential for internal stability and clotting. In other words, they weren't trying to ease the suffering. They were prolonging the transformation. Giovanni writes that most subjects survived between 19 and 26 days. Sensation faded gradually as the process moved deeper, but consciousness remained, leaving the mind fully aware while the body slowly changed state. Imagine watching your own form harden, feeling perception travel upward inch by inch, understanding that you're being reshaped into something no longer entirely human, yet still conscious. But the question that haunted historians was simple. Who could perform this? Who had the knowledge, the discipline, and the emotional distance required to sustain someone through weeks of ritualized preservation? The answer revealed something even darker about Mongol society. The individuals who performed this skin-changing rites weren't soldiers. They weren't executioners. They were the empire's most spiritually revered figures, almost always women. In Mongol culture, female shamans, called Yudagin, were believed to commune directly with Tingri, the eternal sky. They healed warriors, sanctified victories, and guided spirits between worlds. And they too were the ones who performed this ritual. But here is the most shocking part. According to the secret history passages only translated in the 1960s, the Yudagin didn't view this as punishment. They viewed it as ascension. The ritual had a name, becoming the eternal guardian. Here is the translated line from the secret history. When a daughter of the Khan fails in battle, she must not simply die and return to the earth. Her body must be preserved so her spirit remains tethered, guarding the army she failed. The Yudagin will guide the transformation with sacred herbs and the tannin of the eternal oak. She will sing the songs of her victories as her flesh becomes armor. She is not punished. She is reborn as living protection. Pause and let that sink in. This wasn't execution. It was a religious metamorphosis, a way for failed generals to protect future armies through their transformed remains. The Yudagin who mastered these rites trained from childhood. They learned which herbs sustained consciousness without inducing shock. They understood exactly how tannin behaved at precise temperatures. They studied anatomy with enough depth to maintain vital organs during the ritual. And according to the Armenian monks who recorded the aftermath in the history of the nation of archers, the witch women of the Mongols possess knowledge of preservation exceeding our own physicians. They extend life beyond its end, binding the soul within the fading shell. We have seen their creations, the leather standards once formed from women, carried before armies. Some still held awareness in their eyes. For decades historians dismissed these accounts as exaggeration. Medieval chroniclers often embellished enemy atrocities. But then in 1961, Soviet archaeologists excavating Karakorum, the ancient Mongol capital, found something in a sealed ceremonial chamber. Shamanic tools. Bronze needles. Vats with residue that tested positive for concentrated oak tannin. And carved ritual tablets describing procedures matching Persian and Armenian chronicles almost perfectly. The ritual wasn't legend. It was real. And the secret history reveals one final rule. The Yudagin kept the victim conscious not to torture her, but to ensure she completed the journey. She was expected to remain aware until the transformation ended. But why? According to Mongol belief, if a subject lost consciousness or died before the transformation was finished, her spirit would escape the body and the final creation would lose all spiritual purpose. Endurance wasn't an accident of the ritual, it was the core requirement. Awareness was essential. But now you're probably wondering, did this actually happen? Do we have names? Do we know of a real person who endured this fate? And that's where history becomes startlingly direct. 3 separate chronicles, from 3 different cultures, record the same name. A woman of royal blood, a cavalry commander of 10,000, whose failure was catastrophic enough that even being the granddaughter of Genghis Khan couldn't save her. Her name was Alakai, and we know exactly what happened to her. In 1238, as Mongol armies pushed west into the Caucasus, their targets included the kingdoms of Georgia and Armenia. One wing of that invasion was led by Alakai, 31 years old, trained from childhood, and carrying the legacy of Genghis himself. She commanded 10,000 elite riders. She had victories across Central Asia. And near what is now Tbilisi, she walked directly into the era that shaped her fate forever. Alakai made a tactical mistake no young officer should make. She divided her forces in mountain terrain she didn't understand. The Georgian prince Ivanim Kargadzeli, who had been preparing for the Mongol advance for months, knew he couldn't defeat Alakai in open combat. So he set the battlefield himself. Alakai's army entered a narrow valley expecting minimal resistance. Instead, they were trapped between collapsing rock from above and heavily armored cavalry charging from behind. The fighting lasted 6 hours. When it ended, 7,000 of her 10,000 soldiers were gone. Alakai lived. She withdrew. She sent word to Karakorum. And then she waited for judgment. Here's what's important. Losing a battle didn't automatically condemn Mongol generals. If a commander preserved her troops or made a strategic retreat, she could be forgiven. But losing 70% of your force in an avoidable trap, when you were the empire's royal blood, left only one possible outcome. The Armenian chronicle history of the nation of archers records what followed. The monks writing it lived close enough to hear the aftermath themselves. Here is the translated passage. In the summer of 1238, the Mongol generalwoman was brought in chains to the camp outside Tiflis. She did not weep. She did not plead. When the sentence was spoken by the Kurultai, she removed her armor by her own hand and walked into the preparation tent. For 19 days her voice carried across the valley. They were not cries, but songs, the war chants of her people. On the 13th day her singing weakened. On the 17th it became a whisper. On the 19th it fell silent. Yet the witch women continued their work for 4 more days, until the transformation reached its end. 19 days. Think about that. Choosing to sing instead of break. Holding discipline, or belief, or defiance so absolute that she faced the ritual without surrender. For centuries this story was dismissed as medieval exaggeration. A dramatic tale meant to demonize Mongols. The details were considered too elaborate, too impossible. Until 1961. Soviet archaeologists working at ancient Karakorum opened a sealed ceremonial chamber untouched since the 1200s. Inside, they discovered bronze restraints with chemical residue, ceremonial vats coated with oak-derived deposits, and stone tablets engraved with ritual instructions in classical Mongolian script, matching Persian and Armenian descriptions almost exactly. And then there was something else. Something the Soviet government classified for the next 42 years. They found preserved human remains, not skeletons, not dry mummified tissue, material that had undergone a controlled preservation process, mounted on wooden frames, stored in conditions that kept it intact for 7 centuries. The Soviet authorities sealed the archaeologist's report. International scholars were told the chamber contained routine ceremonial objects. But in 2003 that report was finally declassified. And when modern forensic experts examined the samples, what they discovered was far more unsettling than anything in the medieval chronicles. What the Soviet laboratories found reshaped the entire understanding of this ritual, and of the lengths humans will go to enforce belief, discipline, or fear. I'm going to read to you directly from the translated forensic report. This study first appeared in a small circulation academic journal in 2004, and mainstream historians largely overlooked it. Laboratory testing showed surface-level deterioration identical to what would occur after long-term exposure to lime. Deeper tissue samples revealed structural changes linked to gradual penetration by plant-based tanning agents over precisely 1826 days. But the most startling discovery was something no medieval process should have produced. Researchers identified synthetic chemical signatures buried within the preserved layers, compounds far beyond the technological capabilities of the 13th century. Then came the shock. The forensic team detected traces of vitamin K analogs in the treated tissue, substances known to reduce internal bleeding and stabilize biological processes. Modern science didn't isolate vitamin K until 1929. Yet plants rich in it, liver, herbs, leafy greens, were common in traditional medicine for centuries. The implication was staggering. The Mongols were intentionally using naturally occurring clot-promoting materials to keep their captives alive longer. Let me make this absolutely clear. This was not random brutality. This was deliberate physiological management, a controlled system meant to extend life for as long as the body could endure. The forensic report states, drawing on cellular decay patterns and depth of compound penetration, the subject survived no fewer than 23 days and possibly as long as 26. Neurological decline would have moved slowly inward from the extremities, suggesting that awareness remained present even while the body continued to deteriorate under the treatment. 23 to 26 days of conscious endurance while the physical form transitioned into a preserved state. But the story doesn't stop at individual suffering. It escalates into the realm of weaponized psychology. The Mongols did not inter these figures. They displayed them. Both the secret history of the Mongols and the Juvayni Persian chronicle record that preserved commanders were mounted on tall poles and carried at the front of Mongol armies during future campaigns. Imagine the psychological effect. Defenders standing on a fortress wall watching the Mongol host advance, and leading that formation were the preserved remains of their own disgraced leaders. The message cut deeper than any sword. If this is the fate of those who command us, imagine what awaits our enemies. Armenian monastic texts describe how Georgian forces reacted to these ominous standards. Entire groups of soldiers deserted before the fighting even began, unable to face the sight of what they called the leather women, seeing it as sorcery that shattered morale before a single arrow flew. This was psychological warfare at a level of sophistication rarely acknowledged. The practice lasted exactly 21 years, from 1238 until 1259, ending only after the death of Monk Khan, grandson of Genghis Khan, during a Chinese siege. His death triggered a succession crisis that nearly fractured the empire, and during the Kurultai that selected the next ruler, the practice of skin changing was abolished. Later Mongol chronicles explain that the new Khan Kublai, yes, that Kublai Khan, argued that the punishment was backfiring. Women commanders were becoming reluctant to accept high-ranking military roles, fearing the consequences of failure more than death itself. In other words, the tactic was too effective. It was destabilizing the command structure. So the empire ended it. But here comes the final turn in this story. When Soviet researchers presented these findings to UNESCO in 1962, requesting global cooperation to study the remains, the organization made a decision that still shapes historical transparency. They suppressed it. UNESCO's justification, declassified in 2003, stated that revealing the details could heighten cultural tensions among modern communities linked to Mongol history. Translation: the truth was too unsettling, so it was buried. The Soviet team was ordered to seal the samples, refill the excavation site, and silence the research. For over 4 decades, only a few scholars knew that medieval chroniclers had not exaggerated, they had understated. Today, visitors to Mongolia will find no public memorials to those who suffered this fate. No museum halls dedicated to a lackey or the Yudagan shamans who carried out the rituals. The government understandably avoids highlighting this chapter of the past. Yet the evidence is still there. The forensic reports, the multicultural chronicles, and the bones beneath Karakoram that guard secrets UNESCO once deemed too dangerous for the world to confront. Which brings us back to the question raised at the beginning. Why did the Mongols view this punishment as merciful? Because to them it genuinely was a final chance at honor. A failed general transformed into an eternal guardian. Her preserved form didn't just symbolize loyalty, it literally stood as a shield for the army she once led. In Mongol cosmology, that wasn't merely remembrance. It was immortality. It was honor redefined. The alternative was simple: a swift execution by bowstring, your spirit scattering, your legacy erased, your failure permanent. But the ritual of transformation offered something radically different. Your name endured. Your body continued serving the empire long after your final breath. You became a sacred presence woven into the destiny of your people. To us, it's a nightmare beyond comprehension. To them, it was a final chance at redemption. And before we pass judgment, think about this. We still sacrifice human beings for institutional honor. We've just polished the language. We trade mental health for corporate productivity. We trade soldiers' lives for political symbolism. We trade whistleblowers for organizational stability. We still turn people into instruments serving systems larger than themselves. The only difference? We hide it behind policy, branding, and strategic language. The Mongols didn't. They were brutally direct about what their society valued and what it demanded. I'm not defending their system. I'm saying we should recognize the quiet versions we still practice today. So here's the question I want you to honestly confront. If you lived in that world, with those beliefs, in that cosmology, which path would you choose? Quicken? Or 23 days of endurance for the chance at eternal honor? The chance to turn failure into sacred service? The chance to be remembered forever? Think before you answer. And comment the choice you would make, and why. If you've stayed with me through all of this, then you're someone who doesn't flinch from history's harshest truths. Hit that subscribe button because next week we're exploring something just as unsettling. How Mongol horses could run for 3 days without water. A story involving blood drinking, selective breeding, and a cardiovascular adaptation modern science is actively trying to replicate for elite athletes. It's every bit as unbelievable as it sounds. Thank you for watching. Thank you for refusing to look away. History isn't pretty, but only by understanding it can we stop repeating it. I'll see you in the next one.